Raul, what do you think? I was with a coach who told me, look, you are God and you don't manifest what you want because you don't want to. Something I've realized is that many people try to change their lives from the wrong state. They want to express a new reality, they want to live a different life, but inside they keep feeling and reacting and breathing from the same place, and so their body lives in a constant state of contraction. A few days ago, I had a very revealing conversation with someone and they said to me, Raul, guess what? I was with a coach who told me, and Raul, listen, you are God and you don't manifest what you want because you don't want to. Yes, honestly, I don't really agree with that kind of harsh and somewhat radical teaching because the reality is that everyone has their own story and their own timing. You know? Yes, she's right about God being within us. I agree with that, but each person is at a different level of understanding. Okay? Okay? And what happens? In this world of manifestation, you find all kinds of people. You know, there are people who tell you, I manifest instantly, look, and they go on camera and show you a piece of paper with some numbers and say, I manifest this because I say so, because I am God. You know, and boom, they do it right in front of you as if it were a magic trick, right? And what happens is that this creates a lot of pressure on someone who is just starting out. The thing is, what's happening? What's wrong with me? That made her do robotic affirmations, and that made her overload herself and force herself mentally to do it all the time, which also conditioned her to believe that this was the only way she could get results. And she tells me, Raul, but I don't understand. I have things to do. I have my kids, my family, my house, my job, and I couldn't spend all day forcing myself to do everything I was told. So what happened? I gave up? She told me that she got to the point where she felt like she wasn't good for this, that the law didn't work for her or that something was wrong with her. And that caused her a lot of anxiety. That's exactly what I don't want for you. So if right now you feel like you're at this point where you feel stuck and you know what you want, but you can't close that gap, there are two ways I can support you directly, with a session with me or by joining the TM Plus School. I'll leave the links down below. So, what's going on with this situation? What's happening? There's something that we all have called the nervous system. And what happens when the nervous system has gotten used to functioning under pressure? To living in a certain state for a long time, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, an entire lifetime? Well, what happens is that system keeps transmitting the frequency it's been in all this time. Whether it's fear, lack, or urgency, it can also be from a good place, you know? And that's something that Neville understood many years ago, and that neuroscience is starting to confirm. Because you can't create from a state that contradicts what you want to create. Imagination doesn't create just from the mind, but it creates from the state you are in, from how you feel. And that state is not just an idea, but it's something that is felt in the body. Your posture, your breathing, your emotions, your energy, all of these are the physical expression of the state you're in. All of this is part of that state. First, you experience it within yourself, and then it is projected into the outside world. So today I want to talk to you about something that I have been practicing regularly for several years now. And that has helped me radically transform the way I inhabit my internal states. Okay, and this is the conscious use of breathing as an entryway to the desired state. Okay, how did I learn this? Where did this come from? Well, studying Kundalini Yoga and the teachings of Eckhart Tolle were the gateway to this understanding for me. And look, right now it's not so much about using them as a relaxation technique anymore. They definitely work perfectly for those purposes. In fact, at the time, for example, during the pandemic, they helped me a lot with those episodes of anxiety I was having. But nowadays, I use it more as a tool, let's say a hermetic tool, to assume the state of the desire fulfilled from the inside out. That's why I call it hermetic, okay? And Neville explained it in many different ways, but the core is always the same. Neville used to say, the state from which you observe the world determines the world you experience. Okay? And pay close attention to this. Neville didn't mean it as a metaphor. Neville was practically teaching you a mechanism, the whole process. If you live in a state of scarcity, your perception filters reality through that state. And what happens is that by living from that state, your mind doesn't allow you to see opportunities, nor do you act with the confidence that produces different results because you're inhabiting a state. So, what happens then? Reality tells you, hey, here it is, take it, more fear, more scarcity, more lack, have more reasons to keep confirming the state you're inhabiting. And don't see this as if it were a punishment. It's simply coherence. You know, the same thing happens if you live in a state of security and confidence because they are states and tend to be coherent. Okay, consciousness tends to be coherent with what it accepts as truth and tends to express itself. The problem is that most people try to change their reality only at the level of thought, without being aware of the state from which that thought is operating. If I'm making myself clear, you can repeat to yourself, I'm a loved and respected person and X person loves me. You can repeat it 1,000 times. But if your nervous system is operating from tension, from fear, from distrust, from thoughts like, what if they're with someone else? Or what if they're going to criticize me? That's a state you're living in. It's a state that's based on fear, that's based on insecurity. And what happens then? Those affirmations have no ground to take root, nowhere to anchor themselves. It's like trying to plant seeds in cement. Neville taught that the right state must be felt as something real and in the present moment. How? By using our imagination. I was telling you that using your imagination properly isn't just a random image that pops into your head, but a completely immersive experience that you actually go through. You experience it, you feel it in your body. And that is achieved step by step, and this is where breathing comes in. Because that's something the sages of ancient times, for example, already knew. Long before neuroscience existed and before you could measure your heart rate with your watch, or before the vagus nerve and brain waves were studied, these wise men and these traditions already had something very clear, and that is that breathing is a bridge between the visible and the invisible. According to the Vedas, for example, prana is not just the air you breathe, it is the vital force that gives energy, that animates a body. Pranayama is more than just breathing techniques, it's a system that has developed over thousands of years. For what? To consciously influence a person's mental state and energy. There's another concept that I find fascinating, which is pneuma. It comes from ancient Greece, you know? And what does it refer to? It's the vital breath. It's what animates and connects life. So that shows you how important breathing is. Alright, these wise men understood that besides being just a biological process, breathing reflects a person's internal state and can lead you to those states you want. And in fact, it fits perfectly, for example, with the principle of correspondence and equivalence. What is this principle? As above, so below, as below, so above. I'll tell you why. Because think about this, when you're in a state of anxiety, your breathing speeds up, right? When you're in a state of peace, your breathing becomes slow, calm, deep. Your internal state is being expressed in your body. Yes? And here's the interesting part, because it also works the other way around. If you consciously change your breathing, then your internal state changes. You calm your nervous system, you modify the energy you're operating from, the vibration you emit changes, and from there, you start to think, feel, and react in a different way. And you know what's really interesting? You come across these ideas everywhere. You know, in ancient Hebrew, for example, breath and spirit are intimately connected. So, why? Think about this. Why did so many different cultures, completely separated by time and geography, come to this same conclusion? Why? Because breathing is one of the few automatic processes in the body that can also be consciously controlled. Yes? It's this point of intersection between the nervous system, which operates without your permission. Joseph Morphy talks to us a little about this, and your conscious will. So do you see how interesting this is? From the Hermetic perspective, for example, it's the exact point where it connects, where as above, so below takes place. Now, I want to tell you something that took me some time to understand, and it's that, look, you can understand Neville's teachings intellectually and perfectly. All right? You can study Kabbalah, you can know the Bible, you can know the Kybalion, and quote all the Hermetic principles, and explain the difference between the I am and this egoic part of ourselves. You can even teach them and still not integrate them. Why? Why does this happen? Because when the nervous system is chronically in activation mode, when it's dysregulated, when it's incoherent in metaphysical terms, the mind can't sustain an elevated state for long. And another thing I believe and see is that modern life in Caesar's world produces this systematically, And how does it do that? Well, with constant noise, with notifications, with artificial light from our screens, the constant comparison and the social pressure that never ends, right? Look, kids have cell phones in their hands from a very young age. So, what happens? Over time, the body learns to function from this state of urgency, as if that were its natural state. So you try to visualize from there, you try to imagine, and well, you just can't. Because it's like trying to listen to and enjoy Beethoven in your living room in a relaxed way. But, well, the neighbor has loud blaring music on one side at full volume, and it just doesn't let you concentrate. So, the problem isn't with your intention, that's perfectly fine. The thing that gives you trouble is this background noise, which is the physiological part. And the good thing is that breathing can change that background noise in a matter of minutes. Right? And what I want to do now is give you something you can do, something you can implement in your life. Because look, over time, I've settled on different breathing practices that I use depending on what state I need to enter at a given moment. But before we get to them, I want to make something very important clear to you. The thing is, there's no single breathing technique for everything. Okay? There are breathing techniques to activate, there are breathing techniques to focus, to regulate, to meditate, to sleep. It all depends on what state you want to create. And with this, you realize that breathing is not the goal, but rather the doorway to the state of consciousness you want to enter. So for example, when I need to activate myself and I want to raise my energy, or get into creative mode, or I want to train and I'm at full power, what I do is a breathing technique that is similar to the breath of fire in yoga. And, well, it's not exactly the same as the breath of fire, but rather a modification, so to speak, that I adopted and stuck with. It's basically very fast inhalations and exhalations through the nose. Okay? It's a fast rhythm, it's constant, it's about 1 inhalation and exhalation per second, and there are no pauses between them. Alright? It's an active exhalation. You contract your abdomen inward when you exhale, and the inhalation happens naturally on its own when you relax your abdomen. So, it's something like this. Okay? It feels really intense, it's very energizing, honestly, and well, it helps me a lot to get energized. So, you can use this one to get yourself going and recharge your battery to give it your all. And I also use another one that's the counterpart to that, which is for when I feel either very distracted or overstimulated, for example. Here I do something very different, and it's a very slow breath. It's more rhythmic, right? It's inhaling and exhaling in a more balanced way. And there's a method called box breathing. And for me, the rhythm that works is 5 seconds of inhaling, 5 seconds holding, 5 seconds exhaling, and at the end you hold for another 5 seconds. It's really relaxing. Right? I promise you that within minutes of practicing this, your heart rate goes down, it stabilizes, your mind starts to calm down, and that sense of urgency will completely go away. So 5, 5, 5, and 5. perfect for meditating. You can do a revision with it. You can even use it for your sats before going to sleep. Because sats is that space between wakefulness and sleep. It's that very thin line where you're still conscious, where you can still control your thoughts and perform your imaginary acts. Okay? This is for those who are familiar with Neville and his active imagination technique, the practice of assuming before sleep. All right, so in summary, the idea, what I mainly want you to understand is that breathing is something that connects the physical and the psychological. Yes, when you are worried, your breathing reflects it. When you have genuine confidence, your breathing also reflects it. Remember that your internal state will always be reflected in your outer world. So, what I want you to take away from this video isn't just these breathing techniques I just gave you. They're good, and if you want to use them, make them your own. But what I want you to realize is that you have access right here, right now, to enter your desired state. And realize that it's closer and easier than you think. Right? With Neville, with Dispenza, and others, we learned that it's not just about getting things, but about becoming the person who already experiences it and already has it. And doing that is a mental exercise, right? It's a mental exercise that also involves a transformation of your being. What does the Bible tell us? Be renewed in the spirit of your mind and put on the new man. That's what the Bible tells us in Ephesians. Yes, and that transformation begins in the state from which you operate moment by moment, day by day, and breathing gives you access to that state directly and immediately, and it's within your control. And another thing I want to tell you is that you don't need perfect conditions. Perfectas. Nor do you need 1,000 hours of practice. You can start right now if you want to. So I'm going to give you a task that you can either do right after this video or within the next 24 hours. The point is that you sit down and do it. And I want you to choose one of these two practices and try it out as an experiment. And if you feel like it, let me know how it went. If your energy is low, if you need clarity, then do the energizing one. The rapid breathing exercise. Now, if your mind won't stop and you feel urgency or anxiety, well, then do coherent breathing, box breathing, 5, 5, 5, and 5. And those would be some examples. There are many more breathing techniques. And while you practice them, in the end, once you calm down, you can start doing your imaginal acts just like Neville teaches us. Okay? I'm sure you're going to notice a big difference. So if you get a chance, well, give it a try. So, for today, we'll leave it here. I hope what I shared with you today is useful. Thank you very much for listening to me and for being here. And without further ado, from Master Your Mind with Raul, I'll see you in the next video. See you soon. See you.